It's a very well thought out show sheet that I put a lot of time and effort into. I'm telling you, like it's gonna knock it out of the park. So
Can't
no, but
wait.
this is a topic I wanted to cover for a long time, for a very long time. It's a topic that I think a lot of people are going to be interested in. So I'm excited for this show. I really am. Yeah, you ready to kick this one off?
Let's roll.
Let's roll. Let the good times roll.
This is Fantasy Intervention. Now here to intervene with your fantasy life, Chase Vernon.
What's going on, guys? Welcome on into another episode of Fantasy Intervention. But instead of talking, sports and football as a whole, what we're actually going to be discussing here is how to get you guys into the industry, right? How to sit there and make sure that you guys are progressing in the industry and constantly developing yourselves and whatnot. So we have how to start a podcast. And of course, I couldn't do it by myself. There's no way I could do it by myself. I don't even know how to run my company by myself, let alone try and do a podcast. So no, I had to bring in somebody that assists fantasy intervention in major ways, helps us actually get up and running and understands things and how they work, like all the ins and outs. Of course, Steven, what's going on, Steven? How you doing?
Yeah, doing fantastic. I'm a week now removed from wisdom tooth surgery. I can smile. I can move my mouth. I'm not swollen like I've got a bunch of walnuts in my mouth. So I'm feeling great.
Now, we were a little concerned. We were a little
Yeah.
concerned about, if you were going to be able to make it onto this show. We might have had to reschedule, but you toughed through it and you're ready to rock and roll today.
Yeah,
So-
give me enough pain meds, I'll be fine.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. That's just an easy way to do it.
Yeah.
So today we are discussing on how to start a podcast, how to actually start a podcast, my friend. I'm very, very excited for this topic. You've obviously been very versed with this. So sitting there and looking at it, like last week, we actually had Dennis on from Dynasty Nerds, right? And Dennis, we talked about the editing process and the writing process and how you could get into certain companies as a writer. So if you guys missed out on that, you want to check it out, just go check out our YouTube page, youtube.com/fantasy intervention. You guys can find out how to write and how to get into the industry as a writer. But this week, we brought on a guy who actually knows the tech savvy side of things. So Steven, without further ado, could you please tell us where you're from, what you do, the whole background to why I'm bringing you on the show?
Yeah, so I do everything podcast with fantasy intervention. So everything that you see in podcast form normally runs through my hands, and then in addition to that, also doing the podcast management side for Shy City Sports. We have a library of podcasts that range from Bears to Bulls to Cubs to White Sox. And then on top of that, also some live streaming stuff as well. But beyond that, a background in radio, which spans about 15-ish years. Spent some time with ESPN Radio as well as with a CBS affiliate as a news reporter. So broadcast has always been my bread and butter for the most part of things. So just always been that thing that I've hung on to, and it has been kind of my niche in terms of a hobby.
It's fun having you on and watching you work because you're doing stuff that, I've been trying to run this podcast now for a year and a half. And then, I sit there and I look at it and I'm like, I can't figure this out. And I bring it to you and you're like, oh, you just do this, and this. And it's like, how'd you know that? And it's just fun to watch you work, man. So with that being said, how did you actually get into it? Like, what was, how did you get started in this industry? Because I know I started with pretty much nothing, which we'll probably discuss here in a little bit. I started with pretty much nothing, trying to figure it out from the ground up. How did you get started?
So a lot of it was just kind of self-evaluation and self research with things. And so I mean, really everything that I do now stemmed from really not even in podcasting, but the broadcast side of things, and kind of learning how that all worked, and in really what was available 15 years ago versus what's available now in terms of the options, and just like the information out there is night and day. And so a lot of it came down to that. And then in addition to that, I started off with this teeny tiny mic that you like the little thin ones that you get from Microsoft. They're like $10. They come with the computers back when the desktops were these giant towers. And honestly, just recording through a voice recorder, like the standard voice recorder software from Microsoft. It was very, very simplistic when there were, a handful of podcasts. With that, it would be, just recording daily bits on, what the sports news is, specifically in the Illinois, Wisconsin region for that day. And then from there, just kind of learning as I go with figuring out, okay, how can I make the audio quality sound better here? Why does this sound this way? What do these programs offer that the program I'm using now doesn't, that can make me sound better? And not only that, but in terms of delivery, being your harshest critic. And so it's just kind of been these things. And really, after 15 years, has not been a situation in which I've really changed much. You can't really have this idea that, okay, you're past that. You can always perfect something better in terms of what you do.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. See, I'm still learning. No, I love that aspect. Like, you literally just press the record button on the old Microsoft thing, and that's how you got.
Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. So, with me, I started out without a laptop back like 18 months ago, right? And I was like, okay, I guess I got to start with the laptop and figure out what I'm doing from there. And I bought the completely wrong laptop. It was like a $200 like notebook or something like that, where it couldn't even handle recording. So I actually had to go back and purchase a better laptop, which was, by the way, a MacBook 2012. So it wasn't too much of an
Still
upgrade.
behind the times.
It was what I could afford. At the time. So it still did its job, and it was still able to do it. I ended up researching a few things, reached out to some people that were DJs and radio hosts and whatnot. And I was like, hey, what mic should I get? And they sent me like this mic that was like 30 or 40 bucks, essentially. They sent me a soundboard, which I don't even know is even, useful at this point in time. They sent me, just literally the bare basic minimum. I mean, this headset, everything like that, to make sure that the sound quality was good while I was recording. So, I mean, do you even need like a soundboard? Do you need any of this stuff? Like, which level would you recommend starting at? If you were going to invest and start a podcast today and you didn't have any equipment, what would you be willing to invest?
I mean, that's the thing, is you kind of get what you pay for in when it comes to podcasting and the equipment and everything. In terms of like the soundboard first, I actually don't have a soundboard. I've never used a soundboard, but I think that's also because I have the editing background that I do. Soundboards can go a long way, though. There are small, Shure makes a great soundboard. They have 2-channel and they have 4-channel ones that are fantastic. They are cheap. And there's also ones that they have that can be plugged in via USB that are fantastic, versus, having to plug in wires for microphones and then back to USB and just all over the place. And then you find yourself with a mountain of wires, kind of like I do down here on my desk. But really, I mean, in terms of investing, there are, again, like you mentioned, that $30-$40 range, there are a couple solid ones. And it's great because there's the entry-level market is getting cheaper by the day, which is fantastic, because a lot of people are realizing, you don't have to spend $500, $600, $700 on equipment to get started. Samson Meteor mic, that was one of my favorites, and it's like a $60 mic. And I mean, that can get you quality that you would not expect to get out of something that cheap. The Snowball, the Yeti Snowball mics, those are fantastic. I know that's one of the most popular ones. And then Electronica also makes quite a few cheap ones too. But really, I mean, you can get into this game for less than $50. There's no doubt that you can get into this for less than $50 and making it sound good. It's just a matter of how good you want to make it sound. But that's at least the launch point, because your editing software these days, there are free options out there that are fantastic. Audacity being the main player in the game. And I mean, you don't, like I said, you don't necessarily need the soundboard unless you're going to start adding effects, or you have multiple people in the same room as you, so you can, divulge it through one channel into your computer. But really, a mic is all you need these days to really get started up. And so it's pretty easy to get rolling and figure out what you need to start things up.
That's kind of like where I started with, like we're sitting there. I had one of my buddies. We're in the same room. We're recording. I'm using GarageBand, which, by the way, I had no idea what the hell I was doing. I had to look up so many YouTube videos trying to figure out exactly how to, edit these shows. And we'll dive into that here in a second. But,
Yeah.
What are some of the platforms? You brought up Audacity, which is probably one of the most popular ones. Do you need to get a premium version of these editing softwares, or can you go with the free ones?
I mean, you can go with the free ones. There's nothing stopping you. And really, this is the other nice thing about the way things have evolved over this last decade. Like I know that, with Fantasy Intervention, we were just using Anchor. Anchor has the opportunities for you to record inside of Anchor for free.
You can record inside of Anchor?
You can record inside of Anchor.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, and you can upload things. You can set up intro audio, outro audio. I mean, it is a one-stop shop, and it's all free. That's the great thing about it.
And they can help you make money too. If you sign up and you get enough listens, they can actually help you make money, which we'll I guess that's our next thing. We're kind of getting ahead of the show sheet.
Yeah.
But so it's not only free, but then they can help you make money, which is absolutely, it's awesome. And it's not a lot of money. You're talking about, pennies on the dollar essentially, but it's still a little bit of money here and there. So,
Right.
Do you have the premium stuff, or at what point did you decide to get the premium stuff if you did?
So yeah, I run with the Adobe Creative Suite, and so I use Adobe Audition for all of my editing in that regard, and then with the podcast platforms and using Spreaker versus Anchor, because really and I know I mentioned this earlier with just getting started and paying out cash, is you kind of get what you pay for in terms of like the distribution as well, and everything that goes into making sure that you're set up, and people are finding you, and everything is what you need it to be, and even in monetization as well. It's you can find something that's very turnkey, very easy if you're not that tech savvy, and there's things that are a lot more in depth that you can get into as well. Like, I mean, I'm sitting here in my basement studio that I built over quarantine time here, where it's putting together more premium products, but at the same time, if it's not something that you're going to invest in heavily and see a future in, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, because you don't necessarily need it. There's a lot of people across Twitter, across the podcast space, that are just recording at their desk and are just hanging out there, and it's enough. And honestly, again, the gap between solid audio quality and not so great audio quality is slowly starting to mesh, and it's, again, not as much of a barrier as it used to be.
Yeah, and there's some equipment out there that can obviously make you better, but
Right.
you talked about obviously like editing and making sure that you're doing things right. And honestly, I believe it's the most important thing when putting out a podcast is the editing process. Not just going in, throwing in an intro and an outro, but making sure there's quality content. And it's tough. It's the most important part, but it's also the most draining thing, because guess what? You just did all your research, right? You just did all your compiling of stats. You just wrote up your show sheets, if you guys do that. And then you record it, and then you have to go back and you have to listen to yourself, and everything you already said, everything you already know is now being repeated. It's now on a loop. And so you have to listen to yourself and everything you said. But I can't tell you how many ums I said on my first, 50 shows, and how I had to edit that out every time, and how it killed me to hear the word and I can't hear the word anymore. Very similar to how I get really salty, or not salty, but really aggravated by the word that in editing articles. When I hear on a podcast, I start counting How many times somebody says within a
Great
period of
drinking
time?
game.
Oh no, you'd be there's no way you'd end up being sober by the end of that for a
Yeah,
lot of these newer
exactly.
podcasts. But the thing is like you got to take the time out and edit it, because like people are going to stop listening. They're going to stop tuning
Right.
in. They're going to stop paying attention to everything you're saying, and they're just going to get annoyed with the word and it happens. But there's other words as well that you know, like you realize that you say. And I still have words. I still do things that are, out of left field that I have to edit out of my shows and whatnot. But it's tough and it's a grind, but you still got to do it and you still got to edit. And it also helps you improve so you don't do it in the future.
Right.
I don't
right.
say
And
nearly as much as I did before. I mean, this show is probably the most I've said in the entire time I've been doing podcasts over the past weeks, and it's because I've explained the word But either way, you still got to go through. You got to grind. You got to edit that stuff out because it makes you better as an individual as well.
Right.
So,
and just to touch on that point, I will say the biggest piece of advice to all of this is your sound quality. If you don't have good sound quality, that needs to be fixed immediately above all else.
I'm working on it,
Like
man.
you
Stop
said,
yelling at me.
But I mean, that's the thing. Whether it's echoey, you're getting clicks that like the ums and everything like that. It's again one of those things that you have to hone in on. You have to be your harshest critic. If you stop being your harshest critic, you're not going to improve. That's all there is to it.
Nah, I love that. Love that 100%. So is there something as an editor that you notice people do outside of like the ums and whatnot, or is that pretty much the consensus of it is like the small words that you just say way too much of, anything along those lines?
That's definitely the one that sticks out the most. But the other one that also sticks out is the dead air. The fact that there's times where all of a sudden you'll hear 5 seconds of nothing and you're like, is there an issue with my audio? Is it a problem with what they uploaded? You need to have that consistency. You need to have that flow in terms of what the conversation is. And without that, I mean, that's just as awkward, honestly, almost as the bad audio, where it's like, what am I listening to here? It's like that awkward conversation at like the office Christmas party that you want to get out of, but you really don't know how. And you're like, okay, I'm going to go over here now and pretend that this never happened. I mean, people are going to look at your podcast the same way, where they're going to be like, this is really bad. I'm going to sit here and listen to this. No, I'm going to go find something else that has the same type of content that I'm looking for and listen to that, because again, it just sounds more professional. And really that's the other thing too, is whether you're doing this solo or whether you're doing it with a friend, two friends, whatever it may be, you need to make sure that mesh is there between whoever's
chemistry.
doing it. Yeah, the chemistry in terms of getting that rolling. That's definitely something else that I've noticed. And then the other thing too, echo. You'll notice from time to time with podcasts, especially if you're starting out, there can be an echo, or it sounds like you're really far away from the mic and you're way back here, or whatever it may be. But just having that, again, that quality, I highly recommend. And this is going to sound crazy, but recording in a closet around clothes where sound can't bounce off. Like obviously my setup's a little bit more intricate, where I've got this egg crate foam on all the walls where nothing is going to bounce off, and you're not going to get that type of feedback. But that's one of the other things too, is I'd say those are the three biggest things, is just be mindful of what that audio quality is as well, and listen to some of the bigger names and figure out how you can kind of get as close as you can with what you have to that type of audio.
Yeah, I mean, sitting here, I have blinds, by the way. I don't know if, no, you can't see it. I have blinds behind me, but yet I actually added this, I guess, what are they called? Drapes. I added in drapes behind me to actually absorb some of the sound so it stopped bouncing off. I've got carpets around me. I've got literally like an ottoman that's facing towards me, but it's standing up sideways, just to make sure the sound doesn't bounce off as much as what it was, when I was downstairs in my kitchen, and it probably echoed a little bit more. So obviously improving your sound quality is tremendous. But we talked about how you have your editing platform, right? Which is, GarageBand, Audacity. So when you go to upload, you finish editing, right? That's done. You're done editing. You're ready to go. Now you need to figure out exactly what to upload to. And people think it just goes straight out to like, Apple iTunes. But no, you have to have a platform, right? In order to be able to produce it to these other companies. So with that being said, what is, yes, Bob, I have drapes, by the way, in the chat. I have drapes. So sitting there and looking at it like, is it called a platform first off?
Yeah, I mean, you call it a podcast distribution platform that you would then use, whether it's, again, Anchor is obviously the popular one because it's free. Podbean, Spreaker, I mean, the list goes on and on for what's out there and what you can use. They're popping up every day.
Don't use SoundCloud. I figured that out the
Yeah.
hard way over the past year and a half of using SoundCloud and paying for SoundCloud. By the way, I'm paying for the premium version of it. Yeah, and it turns out that it's not made for podcasts. And since I am not tech savvy, I had no idea until we tried to monetize it. It can't monetize anything past like what, 5 or 10 minutes, whatever the piece was. So turns out that SoundCloud is not made for podcasting. So if you're listening, do not use SoundCloud if you're trying to start a podcast. I chose the wrong way.
I mean, I will say this. Again, I know that, you know, speaking from fantasy intervention side, we just switched from Anchor to Spreaker, but that's more just to get us a little bit more bang for our buck and go from something that's free to not free. That honestly, there's the couple out there, Anchor obviously being the biggest one. They're owned by Spotify, and so they're going to set you up with Apple. I believe it's Apple and Spotify out of the gate, and then a lot of these providers, Anchor's not included in this, but they literally have one-click submission to get to all these other platforms, whether it's iHeart or Amazon or Google Podcasts or Stitcher or just any of them. They all have their own way of how they go about it. And again, like I said, you get what you pay for, because there's a lot of them out there that are like, yeah, we can distribute to it, but you are the one that needs to log into these sites and set it up, versus, again, just like the one-click submission and, hey, we're on iTunes or just anything like that.
That's huge. It took me like probably 3 or 4 months to realize that I was not on Google Play, because I actually had to go into Google Play, set up an account, and go through that with SoundCloud. So, you know, that's a big piece to it. And it's a lot of extra work, but you know, you can pay, what is it, like $20 a month or so for Spreaker and
yeah, I mean, it honestly all depends on what you need. I mean, the plans on Spreaker, I think, start off at like $6 a month and go all the way up to 50, depending on what you need. A lot of that ties into storage, and if you want to customize feeds that go into basically your podcast's SEO, so more people can find you, and then just more customization versus just the bare minimum of what they offer. And so really there's something for every size and shape out there in terms of what you're doing, whether it's one podcast or you have a fleet of podcasts.
So let's go ahead and let's talk about an issue that we just had recently, right? Over at Fantasy Intervention. We went from SoundCloud over to Anchor.
Yep.
And we didn't check up with the individual places like Castbox, like Google Play, like Spotify, like Apple iTunes. And we ended up not having a podcast exist on those platforms unless you were already subscribed to it. So essentially, you will have issues that constantly rise, especially when you make changes with your platforms. So it's crucial for you to actually check up constantly and consistently and make sure that, you know, your stuff is still available, because you could go 6 months and not even realize, hey, this was not uploading to a place that, guess what, I have 16 listeners a month, or I have 25 listeners a month, or I have 150 listeners a month on, and all of a sudden you're not getting those listeners in anymore. So if you start to notice certain drops or whatnot, it's crucial for you to maintain your podcast as you continue to go. And I know it's starting to sound like a lot of work to do a podcast, because all of a sudden you have to buy the equipment, then you have to sit there and you have to record your stuff and find somebody you have chemistry with, and you have to edit and try and get better at it. Guess what? Like, when you signed on to do a podcast, you didn't sign on to just do a podcast. You signed on to be an SEO specialist. You signed on to be an editor. You signed on to be multiple different things. And guess what? It's going to help you out in life, and it's going to help you progress as an individual as well.
Well, yeah, and honestly, it is what you make it. That's ultimately what podcasting is. It is what you make it. And that's the nice thing about it. I mean, if you just want to hang out with one of your buddies and record something and have it show up on iTunes every week, and you really don't care much past that, like,
maybe it's just for your league. Maybe you're just talking shit to your league, and that's what you want to do. And as long as it appears you're good, you're good. So you don't have to worry about all this stuff.
Right. And the other nice thing about this too is, like you said, it does sound like a lot of work. It does sound like you're getting yourself into a lot, but At the same time, once you get it down, once you have
Yes.
everything set, it just goes. It's so autopilot with what you do, and it just becomes that nature. You don't have to sit there and literally, I guess, watch it. I don't, or like pretend it's like some child you need to keep an eye on 24/7. But I mean that's just part of it. It will take some time depending on what you want to make of it to get it to where you want it to be. But once you get there, you're in a pretty good place. You're smooth sailing.
Yeah, and so we are coming to a point where we're about to close out the show here within the next 15 minutes or so. So if you guys have any questions that we haven't answered, please make sure you put them in the chat. We want to make sure that we're covering everything as we go. So if you guys have any questions about, what we're doing or, how we're going about it, please go ahead and lay it out in the chat. But yeah, it's something where I used to take 4 hours to edit a show because I said so many times, and also I didn't know what to look for when I'm scanning through the episode. And like you'll be able to start seeing like little clips and pieces in the sound of where that's what an looks like. I should go listen to that part. And so you start to learn and get better, and it just gets easier from here on out with podcasting. And it's something that it's encouraging to see progression, and so I love that aspect. Now, one of the biggest steps that people skip, right? They put the podcast up on their platform. People are ready to listen to it. It's all good to go. But they didn't do one major thing. Well, a couple major things. They didn't put tags in. They didn't put a description in. And I think it's crucial because how are people going to find what you're looking for?
Right. Yeah, that's one of the aggravating things that we come across quite often. And this just goes for anything out there, is really you need to have a title that draws people on, really not even going to the description first, but the title. If you're not giving yourself a title that draws people in, I mean, I'll use the episode from Wednesday night with Matt Harmon. I'm like, you want Matt Harmon's name to be front and center, like Yahoo Sports, Matt Harmon. Like that's going to draw more people in versus saying like fantasy intervention, Wednesday night, whatever it may be. You want to try and have something that gets people's attention quicker. And at that point, then past that in the description, usually I aim for about 2 sentences, maybe 3, depending on the length, and kind of have it be almost like a teaser and something that's going to get people fired up. We use DJ and Taylor's new show
It's great
that they just started up here, and one of their talking points was Allen Robinson is overrated. And I'm a Bears fan, so I'm like, what the fuck is this? And so like it immediately caught my attention that I'm reading this. I'm like, okay, like here we go. And so you want that information in there, but also just in a compact and concise format, because really across all the different platforms that your podcast is available, wherever you push it out to, it's going to display this information differently. I'm sorry, Jeff.
Jeff in the comments saying Jeff Bell doesn't draw the listens.
He was on Wednesday night as well. It was a very good show. But that's the thing, is you need to be mindful and do it in a compact way. And not only that, but like you said, past the tags, the hashtags, and just the detail of the episode, knowing where the episode needs to drop in terms of the categories that each of the podcast platforms lie in. Like, for example, like iTunes has gotten a lot better over the last year in terms of expanding categories. You can drop things not only into sports, but into football, into fantasy sports, and making sure that it's labeled correctly, that it's falling into those categories, not only for your episodes, but your show overall as well, because you really don't want to let anything fall through the cracks in terms of what your content is.
It's incredible, like how much I dismissed it at first, and how I just put out a podcast because I was so busy. I was doing 10 podcasts a week, so I didn't have time to do the description and stuff. And then I realized, like, every time I did have time to do the description or the tags, it ended up garnering probably close to 50 more listens than the ones that didn't. And I know that's not a ton for those bigger fish out there, but it does make a huge difference for people that have, maybe 300 subscribers, 400 subscribers or so. Makes a big difference, of course.
Yeah,
now,
absolutely.
Let's go to the second most important part of the podcast outside of editing. And this is something that you said companies fail to do from time to time. really grinds your gears. Do you remember a conversation? Am I putting you on the spot without telling you what exactly it is?
Trying to remember what I said there.
It's in order to get more listens, of course.
Oh, yes. Never stop promoting. Is that what we're referring to
That's
here?
what we're talking
All
about.
right. Yes, never stop promoting. Like, that's the thing, is you cannot sit there and upload something and just think that people are going to find it on their own, because you need to realize that in specific spaces, like, I'll use fantasy football as an example. Like, there are a lot of fantasy football podcasts out there, and if both you, your co-hosts, your guests are, I mean, guests obviously is kind of asking a lot of your guests already on top of them joining your show. However, but promoting it out there, whether it's joining, message boards that focus on the topics that you're talking about, or sharing it across social media, and just finding these niches that are looking for that type of content, because it's just sitting on your hands after you hit that submission button and publish the episode, it's not going to do you any good. You're not going to find success overnight. And really, in the same regard, you can almost argue that just doing a simple post, just one post on an episode, is not enough these days to
No.
do anything. And I mean, even
People
like
just
with
pass by it without even realizing what's up there, and they don't actually read the titles. But if you do it multiple times, that's why we reshare. By the way, if you haven't noticed on Fantasy Intervention or join our Circle Underscore on Twitter, we actually reshare content from the previous week. And we don't put out new stuff on the weekends. We just focus on re-promoting all the other stuff that we've already put out. It's a big thing to get in front of people's faces multiple times, similar to a commercial. I mean, how many times have you seen the same exact Geico commercial? It's something that needs to appear in front of people's faces and be promoted on multiple different occasions.
And it's not just that, but also I would recommend never copying and pasting various things that you might put in descriptions or details about episodes, especially when you're on a social media channel. You want it to be something that is eye-catching, something that makes you think, okay. I'll use our Bulls podcast that we do as an example, where they had a guest on from NBC Sports Chicago, and they made a very bold suggestion in terms of a trade. And so on social media, you might want to say, could a B player get traded for a B player, something along those lines, something that's specific within the content that was described, that isn't necessarily within the context of the description of the episode, that makes people think a little bit and be like, okay, I want to hear what the mindset is, or the thought process is behind this specific point. Or, you won't believe what so-and-so said about so-and-so, player or team or whatever it may be, just to drag them back in. So you need to make it more enticing past what the episode actually is.
Yeah, and that's something, we need to improve on as well. And it's something that we continue to strive and improve every single day, is, figuring out ways to draw people into the show. As I'm sitting here and I'm going on to Facebook and I'm like, hey, who's ever wanted to start a podcast? Because we just discussed the promotional standpoints of so-and-so. And it kind of drives people in for people that already have a podcast, but might not be getting that many follows. It's all just a different concept. And sitting there and trying to figure out the best way to go about things takes time. And it takes a lot of effort, to be honest with you. But hey, if you're trying to make it and you're trying to get more listens, you're trying to, expand your brand, it's kind of what you have to do.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, and you kind of touched on it there. This isn't something that happens overnight. This is something that takes time to, get to a point where you feel comfortable with it, that feels good. I mean, yes, there are some out there that will accelerate quicker than you. A lot of them will accelerate slower than you. You just
Most
need
of them.
to, yeah.
If you're willing to do this work that we're talking about, if you're willing to follow everything that we've been talking about, they're going to go a lot slower than you, because it takes time to do all these things, and most people aren't willing to put in the work. So, sitting there and looking at the podcast industry as a whole, we're about to take off. Like, it went through a little bit of a lull, and although it still has increased to an extent, still this past year wasn't where it could be, because we went through COVID. People weren't working as much. They weren't in their cars as often. They weren't sitting there and dealing with the podcast industry. Meanwhile, live views and everything kind of took off, skyrocketed. That's why we went over to live views for a little bit, was to increase our exposure. However, podcasts are about to reign supreme. They're about to be right back on top. So now is the time to get back into podcasting. And it's something that I've talked with you multiple times about how we need to, get back into this and how it has not been a focus of mine, but is going to be a focus of mine. So,
Right.
With that being said, like, are podcasts going to come back out on top? Like, do you really think that podcasts are going to be the way to go about things, and people are going to find them essentially because people are going to start promoting their podcasts more often than these live streams?
I mean, I think they're going to reach that point. I live right around the corner from a train station that heads into Chicago, and right now the parking lot's empty. No one's commuting. Everybody's working from home. But we're going to reach a day here, honestly. I think middle of this year where that parking lot's going to start filling up again. And you think about even just that one place alone, there's thousands of people that are sitting on a train for an hour and a half to go Chicago, and they got to do something there. And the same thing with commuting on the roads. Like, I love it because I haven't hit rush hour traffic in over a year now, but at the same time, like, there's going to be a lot more people moving, and you need to be ready to have yourself set up and putting your base together now, and putting your setup together now, and knowing that you have everything ready and raring to go is only going to help you when that time comes. The biggest things, with that.
I think we got a little bit of a freeze right when the anticipation was building up. Right when the anticipation was building up.
Am I back now?
Freezing. You're back. Wait, maybe. Check 1, 2. You good? No. Right when the anticipation was building up, I'll give you guys a quick stat real quick that I just pulled off of Buzzsprout. According to Edison Research, the number of Americans listening to a podcast each week has grown by 120% over the past 4 years. 90 million Americans listen to a podcast every single month. So it's only growing and getting bigger. Steven, I think you're back with us.
Am I back now?
Yeah. What's the biggest thing?
Okay. So biggest thing is consistency in the content. Am I
You're good.
am I still here? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. I don't know what's going on with my Wi-Fi today. So biggest thing is consistency in the content, making sure that you're putting out things on a consistent basis. Because again, when people start, getting back to the commuting, and they need this time to find things to keep them occupied during these long commutes and everything else in between, is they're going to expect things to drop at certain days, and they're going to expect to come in and be like, hey, there's a new episode of this. And if you go 2-3 weeks without dropping new content, you're gonna lose listeners, because they're going to find somebody else in that same stratosphere that puts out similar content and does it more often and does it better. There's always somebody coming after you. You need to keep that in mind. Someone always coming after you.
Yeah, it's crucial, and it's something that I've been I've been hitting on. Like, I've been hitting on over and over and over again. Consistency is key. Having the time slot at 8 o'clock on Wednesdays, at 8 o'clock on Tuesdays for us, at 7 o'clock on Thursdays, at noon. Like, I overslept today. I could have postponed this podcast another 2 hours, so I had time to make sure that I was ready. Go do my workout like I do every morning, do all my stuff. But no, we're going to stay consistent. We're going to do it at noon every single day, because guess what? That's what the people expect, and that's what they want. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get out of here. I want you to go and tell everybody where to find you, what you do. If they have any questions, should they slide into your DMs?
Yeah. Now you can find me on
and he lost it again. Jeez. You can find him at Twitter, or on Twitter, at Steven Roto, or Steven_Roto. See, I butchered his name. You can find him on Twitter.
Now? I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, you're back now. Jeez.
You're
gonna have some editing to do. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I am. No, okay. You can find me on Twitter at Steven_Roto. I'm the only one home right now, so there shouldn't be anything happening with my Wi-Fi. I blame Comcast. Yeah, Steven_Roto. You can find me across Fantasy Intervention and Shy City Sports, random graphics, articles, and everything in between. And then, slide into the DMs if you have any questions about anything. DMs are always open. And I will say this. I know I didn't say this yet. When you're recording your podcast, always people can hear smiles, and it makes a world of difference when it comes down to recording.
It does. And the energy comes out, the energy comes out 100% when you're actually having a good time doing it. So that's the most important part.
Yep.
You guys can go check out all of our content at Join Our Circle _. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/fantasy intervention. Of course, youtube.com/fantasy intervention. We hit this show every single Friday. Next week, we actually have Sal Lito on, who is going to tell us how he got the podathon started and how he started networking and how important networking is in order to grow a brand. So I'm very excited about that. Of course, his brand is something that has blown up over the years. You guys can also check me out at FF_intervention on Twitter. Thank you guys for listening, and thank you all for letting us intervene with your fantasy football life.